Isotonic exercises sound very similar to isometric exercises, but they're not the same thing. You likely already know what isotonics are, but I will explain quickly what they are and then also what the different ways are in which you can adapt them, what type of person or type of Achilles injury or presentation might actually benefit the most from each type, and also what you should aim to build up to prevent Achilles tendinopathy or tendonitis from coming back. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maryke. I'm one of the physiotherapists from treatmyachilles.com, where you can get online physiotherapy assessment as well as treatment of any type of Achilles injury, all done via video call. Now, I realize that sounds a bit weird. Most people want to know, how can you treat or assess me if you're not in the same room as me? But we explain in detail almost on our website why online video calls work so well for Achilles type injuries. So have a look at the description of this video. I'll put a link to our website there if you're interested in that. What is an isotonic exercise? Well, we've seen in previous videos that a muscle can contract in three ways. Isometrically, which means the muscle stays at the same length while you're contracting it and you don't get any movement. So isometrics for calves or for Achilles tendons would be you hold the position, the muscle is working, but nothing is happening. You're just sustaining. Then you also have concentric, which means the muscle is shortening as you do as it works. And then you have eccentric, where it lengthens as you work. So for the calf and the Achilles, that would be concentric, lifting up on your toes, so it's shortening, and eccentric, lowering down, so the calf muscle is lengthening as it contracts and lowers you down. An isotonic exercise is your regular calf raise type movement where you combine both concentric and eccentric. So you're lifting up and coming back down. So the muscle works through its shortening as well as lengthening phase as you train it. Why do we like these exercises so much? Well, first of all, it's the way we move or we normally use our Achilles tendons when we walk, when we run, when we jump, any type of movement on our legs really. But secondly, you can adapt them in so many different ways that they can literally suit every single person out there. Our rehab goals are quite often varied between people depending on how sensitive the tendon is, how strong they are, what stage of recovery they are in, and isotonics allows you to adapt it for any of those. Also, they have been proven through the research to be effective for Achilles rehab, so that's brilliant. Of course, they're not the only things we'll use. Sometimes we may decide that isometrics is better. Sometimes we may choose eccentrics, but we've made videos about why we would choose those, so have a look at the description. I've put a link to those videos there. I'm going to demonstrate the very basic versions of the isotonic exercises first, and then we'll get into how you can adapt them for different rehab goals. The key is, though, that you have to choose the version that matches your tendon's current level of sensitivity plus its strength. If you choose something that is too hard for it or it just can't tolerate at the moment, the exercises will make your pain worse. And this is why it can be useful to speak to a clinician, because they can determine and help you figure out which exercises are actually right for you. Okay, but let's get into the easiest version of the isotonic calf raise. You can do it in two ways. Our calf muscles are made up of the gastrocnemius, which is the more superficial and the higher up one, and it attaches behind the knee. But then you've got the lower calf muscle as well, the soleus, which doesn't attach above the knee. It attaches around this area below the knee. So we can target the gastrocnemius more by doing calf raises with straight legs. And as soon as we bend our knees, we now put the gastroc in a position where it doesn't work that much. So now we are targeting the soleus more. So that would be it. So for the basic gastroc calf raise, you'll notice that I'm holding on for balance. These are not balance exercises. If you want your Achilles exercises to be as effective as they can, do stabilize yourself. For this one, we're going to hold on. Your feet are about hip distance apart, so roughly that distance. You'll notice that I'm on a soft mat. Please protect your feet, because if you do calf raises on a hard surface, even if you're not using extra weights, it can sometimes injure the little bones in the ball of your foot. And then that can become really painful and stop you from doing your rehab. So either do it on a really soft surface or wear your shoes for these. So you're holding on to something, feet are hip distance apart, and then you just lift up and you come back down. And we'll see that we can play with the speed and everything depending on the rehab goal. We'll get into that a little bit later. The key here is, yes, we eventually want to go full range up, full range down, but if it hurts to go all the way up, we're not going to force it. We're just going to go to where it's comfortable. If you want to adapt it for the soleus, all you do is you bend your knees and you do the same movement, but now you're keeping your knees bent throughout. However, if you have insertional Achilles tendinopathy or your knees are just not happy with life, that can irritate both of those things. So you can also do the soleus one in sitting. So for the sitting version of the soleus, you want your knees at roughly a 90-degree angle. It doesn't matter if it's not 100% 90 degrees. It should just not be too far back, because if you're going to have it that far back, you may as well be doing it in standing, because then you're going to get a stretch around the insertion of the Achilles and can irritate that. So have them forwards, and that's where you're going to do it. And all you do is slowly up and slowly back down. And again, my knees are hip distance apart, just to simulate what it would be like if I was standing up. Okay, so those are the three basic versions of the calf raises or isotonic exercises. Let's now see how we can adapt them for each different case. The first group of patients we're going to think about are people who have really sensitive tendons that flare up when they do nearly nothing. And when they do flare up, the pain is quite intense. So for these people, they are also often quite worried about starting exercises because they don't want to make their pain worse. Now, at this point, their rehab goal is not to build strength. Strength will come later. For now, the rehab goal should be bring the pain under control and get them confident in movement, because then that paves the way that we can figure out what is the correct baseline of exercise where we can start and build from. It can be tempting at this point to think that I'm just going to rest my Achilles and just let it calm down. But often that actually doesn't calm the pain down. It remains painful and uncomfortable. And it's because the less you do, the worse your circulation becomes. And then all the chemicals that's irritating the tendon just accumulates and the nerve endings just becomes more and more sensitive. If you can do low load exercises that helps improve the circulation without straining the tendon, then you can get the circulation improves, those chemicals flushes away, and the pain nearly immediately feels better. Secondly, they are brilliant at building confidence in actually moving again. So I have two favorite exercises when we think of isotonics specifically for this. And the one is the seated calf raise, and the other is the double leg standing calf raise. Which one I choose will depend on the confidence of the person. If I tell you to do a double leg standing calf raise and you feel very nervous about that, then I'm going to say, okay, we're not going to do it in standing, we'll do it in sitting. Why am I changing my mind? Well, because there's strong evidence that shows that if somebody does something that really scares them, a rehab exercise that scares them, that can actually make their pain worse, because it triggers the flight or fright reaction, and it's an automatic reaction. It's not that the person has any control over that. It's just something that happens. So the type of exercise we start with, plus the number of repetitions and how often they do it, all depends on what my patient feels comfortable with giving a go. Because these exercises are low load exercises and they don't need recovery periods as often as the higher load things we're going to talk about, these exercises can be done daily and they can be done several times a day, but it really depends on the person. So don't jump in with doing them all day long if your physio hasn't suggested that, because it may be too much in your case. So it's really good to speak to a clinician about this. But often we tell our patients to do them daily and even break it up, that they do some in the morning, middle of the day, in the evening, because then we can get the circulation improved throughout the day and avoid those really uncomfortable times, especially if you've been sat still for a while. You'll know how uncomfortable it can feel to get up and walk. So doing the low load exercise before you get up while you're still in the chair can make things so much more comfortable. I have made a video where I've demonstrated different options for exercise for really painful Achilles tendons, because there's other things you can do like isometrics as well. So have a look at the description of this video. I talk you through and demonstrate those exercises there. The next thing you want to think about is how much stretch you want through your Achilles tendon. So to demonstrate, if my foot goes into this position where my toes are higher than my heel, can you see that my Achilles tendon is starting to pull tight and it's compressing against the heel bone? Now, if you have mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy, so it affects this part of it, then actually doing your calf raises into a position of stretch often works better for it than doing it to floor level. Whereas if you have insertional Achilles tendinopathy, where it affects more where it attaches onto the heel bone, and especially if you've got a bursitis with that, then working into a stretch position can really irritate it, because then it pulls it tight over the heel bone and it's like pressing on a bruise, and it can often make it feel worse. So if you've got mid-portion, you'd want to do it over the side of a step. Some mid-portion ones doesn't like that either, so you may have to start on ground level. It depends on how your Achilles reacts. But I don't have a step at the moment because the only steps are outside and the wind's too rough. But I'm going to demonstrate it for you on the roll towel. And you can use anything. A thick book can even work. So what that would look like, one version could be going up on your toes and slowly back down. And you just drop below it and come back up. This is not a stretch exercise. I often find that people hang at the bottom before they come up. Well, then you're losing the benefit of the exercise in the sense that you're actually telling the muscle to switch off before you try to lift again. So it's not about hanging at the bottom. It's about going down and coming back up. That's the thing you're doing. The speed you do it at, you'll see in a minute, may vary. If you have insertional Achilles tendinopathy, you may do it straight onto the floor so that we're avoiding the position of stretch. But if it's really sensitive, you may even put something under your heels that you don't go all the way to the floor, so that you really avoid that position to start with, in that position. Or you may be wearing your shoes with your heel lift inserts in there. Alison has made a video specifically for insertional Achilles tendinopathy. So if you're interested in exercises for that, have a look at the description. I'll put a link to that one there. Next, we want to think about how much weight you're going to use for your exercises. Now, we have to think about where do you start, what weight you start with, as well as what weight you need to build up to. And this is important because this is the bit that people often miss. They do exercises with some weights, but not heavy enough to actually build the strength they need for their sport. So if we think about it, if you're just walking, it doesn't put that much force through your Achilles tendon. The more you walk, or if you do lots of hiking up hills, it requires more strength. If you run, it requires more strength still. If you do things like tennis, where you've got explosive movements, that actually also needs quite a high level of strength to be built. So we'll choose the starting level of weight depending on the sensitivity of the tendon and how strong that person is. Somebody who's been quite active all the time, the tendon is a bit uncomfortable when they do sport, but it's not super sensitive and they can continue with some sport. They'll start with heavy calf raises quite soon, even sometimes immediately, where somebody who falls into the very sensitive category will first progress from double leg to single leg and then maybe extra weight depending on what we want to build up to. Also, remember, you don't need fancy weights necessarily. 1 liter of water equals 1 kilo. So you could just use water bottles. And yes, you can hold them in your hands, but I find if you're using quite heavy weights, it can be better to put them on your back in a backpack. So they're equal and you can have your hands free to actually hold on for balance. One of the most common questions we get asked specifically about weights is how heavy should the weight be? Well, that's relative to your body weight and the type of sport you want to be doing. So if you think about it, a very tiny person picking up 10 kilos, that 10 kilos is a very big percentage of their body weight. So that's really heavy for them. Whereas a very big person over 6 foot picking up 10 kilos, that's a small percentage of their body weight. So it's really not that much of an issue for them. So when we think of rehab goals, we're working towards a percentage body weight often rather than a specific weight. So for this example, if we think of somebody who's just walking around the house, they don't really want to be hiking up hills or doing strenuous walking. We may just actually get them to build up to using a good volume of single leg calf raises without using extra weights. But if they want to do a lot more walking and they want to do fast walking or hill walking, we may get them building up to doing single leg calf raises with up to 10% of their own body weight extra. So what that means is they're doing a single leg calf raise going up and down, and then 10% of their body weight eventually, not immediately, extra. So I weigh 70 kilos. That would be me going up and down on a single leg plus 7 kilos that I have in my hands or in a backpack on my back. If I'm a runner or I am doing jumping sports, you usually want to be aiming to eventually build up to being able to do your calf raises without any issues with up to 20% extra of your body weight. So single leg calf raise, holding weights, that's 20% of your body weight. So for me, that would be 14 kilos. However, this doesn't work for everybody. Sometimes people just cannot manage to get up to those heavy weights, and that's absolutely fine. If that's the case, then there are other things you can do. You can do more repetitions with that same weight, or you can switch to different speeds of exercises. That can also work. Or you can use the person's sport to slowly build that final strength as well. There's plenty of ways to adapt plans, and there should never be one recipe that has to suit everybody. It has to be a fluid thing. The last way in which we adapt isotonic exercises is by changing up the speed we ask our patients to do the exercises at. So the most common way that we can do that is that we ask them to really slow the exercise down. For instance, you'll get them to take about 3 seconds to lift up and then 3 seconds to come down. But you could also ask them to lift up halfway, pause, lift up more, pause, come up even more, pause, and then same thing going down. Now, why would you do that? Well, 2 reasons. One is if you just drop down, then it's not you doing the work, it's actually just gravity pulling you down. But 2, there is evidence that when you have an injury, especially a long-standing injury, the brain starts to think differently about it and you lose your very fine motor control over that area. By doing the exercises in a very slow, controlled way, you force the brain to take note of the injured area again and really take back the control. So especially during the early stages, when you're just starting your rehab and also when you're still busy with the heavy loads, then slow resistance training has been shown to be very beneficial. But later on in the rehab, say you're doing a sport where you need explosive power or you need to be able to jump, then your physio may actually get you to push up fast and come down slow. Or do plyometrics, where you're literally hopping up and down. So let me show you what I mean. So if you can imagine that I've got a heavy weight on my back, if I wanted to do it explosively, you'll lift up as quickly as you can with the weight, and then you can come down at any pace usually. Quickly as you can with the weight and come down usually. And then for plyometrics, that's an even quicker movement, but that's usually without weight. And it's just things like hopping or jumping or skipping. And depending on the type of movement or the type of sport you do, you'll do different types of hops and things. If you're a runner, if you want to get back to tennis, if you want to get back to any sport that needs that quick movement, adding in those faster type movements is really important towards the end of the rehab period. The thing to take home from this is that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all rehab plan for Achilles tendinopathy. People's starting points have to be different because their tendon sensitivity and strength is usually different. Where you end with your rehab will be different depending on your goals, and how you get there will depend on how your tendon responds, if you can tolerate different positions, and also what else is going on in your life. How much time do you actually have for exercise? How does your body react when you do exercises often versus gives it more recovery time? That's often due to genetics as well. So it's really important that your rehab plan should be adjusted to suit all of this. But the key is that it has to build up to the level of strength that you need for your sport or the activity you want to be doing. If you need help with your rehab, please feel free to reach out. Like I said, we can assess and help you via video call. And if you've got any questions, just ask them in the comments. I'll answer them there. Take care.